Congressman Delaney, your response?
So I think Democrats win when we run on real solutions, not impossible promises. When we run on things that are workable, not fairy tale economics. Look at the story of Detroit, this amazing city that we're in. This city is turning around because the government and the private sector are working well together. That has to be our model going forward. We need to encourage collaboration between the government, the private sector, and the nonprofit sector, and focus on those kitchen table, pocketbook issues that matter to hardworking Americans: building infrastructure, creating jobs, improving their pay,
Thank you, Congressman.
creating universal health care, lowering drug prices.
Senator
we
Warren.
can do it.
You know, I don't understand why anybody goes to all the trouble of running for president of the United States just to talk about what we really can't do and shouldn't fight for. Biggest problem in Washington is corruption. It is giant corporations that have taken our government and that are holding it by the throat. And we need to have the courage to fight back against that. And until we're ready to do that, it's just more of the same. Well, I'm ready to get in this fight. I'm ready to win this
Thank you,
fight.
Senator. Congressman Delaney.
When we created Social Security, we didn't say pensions were illegal. Right? We can have big ideas to transform the lives. I mean, I started 2 companies and took them public before I was 40. I'm as big of a dreamer and an entrepreneur as anyone. But I also believe we need to have solutions that are workable. Can you imagine if we tried to start Social Security now, but said private pensions are illegal? That's the equivalent of what Senator Sanders and Senator Warren are proposing with health care. That's not a big idea. That's an idea that's dead on arrival. That will never happen. So why don't we actually talk about things, big ideas that we can get done? The stakes are too high.
Senator Warren.
So look, he talks.
We'll come to you right after that. Senator Warren.
He talks about solutions that are workable. We have tried the solution of Medicare, Medicaid, and private insurance. And what have the private insurance companies done? They've sucked billions of dollars out of our healthcare system. They've made everybody fill out dozens and dozens of forms. Why? Not because they're trying to track your health care. They just want one more excuse to say no. Insurance companies do not have a God-given right to suck money out of our healthcare system.
Thank you,
and
Senator.
2020 is our chance to
Thank you,
stop
Senator
that.
Sanders.
Detroit was mentioned, and I'm delighted Detroit is rebounding. But let us understand, Detroit was nearly destroyed because of awful trade policy, which allowed corporations to throw workers in this community out on the street as they move to low-wage countries. To win this election and to defeat Donald Trump, which, by the way, in my view, is not going to be easy, we need to have a campaign of energy and excitement and of vision. We need to bring millions of young people into the political process in a way that we have never seen by, among other things, making public colleges and universities tuition-free and canceling student debt.
Thank you, Senator. Thank you, Senator. I want to bring in Senator Klobuchar. At the beginning of the night, you said you're going to hear a lot of promises on the stage. And previously you have said, when asked about your primary opponents, quote, "A lot of people are making promises, and I'm not going to make promises just to get elected." Who on the stage is making promises just to get elected?
Everyone wants to get elected. But my point is this. I think when we have a guy in the White House that has now told over 10,000 lies, that we better be very straightforward with the American people. And no, do I think that we are going to end up voting for a plan that kicks half of America off of their current insurance in 4 years? No, I don't think we're going to do that. I think there is a better way to get what we all want to see, which is lower costs for health care. Do I think that we're going to vote to give free college to the wealthiest kids? No, I don't think we're going to do that. So that's what I'm talking about. But what I don't like about this argument right now, what I don't like about it at all, is that we are more worried about winning an argument than winning an election. And I think how we win an election is to bring everyone with us. And yes, I am one in a state every single time statewide. I have won those congressional districts that Donald Trump won by over 20 points. He just targeted Minnesota last week. And I've done it by getting out there and talking to people, by knowing rural issues and farm issues, and bringing Metro people with me in the state that had the highest voter turnout in the country.
I want to bring in Congressman O'Rourke. Congressman O'Rourke, please respond.
I think a big part of leadership and showing our commitment to the American people is delivering on our commitments. As a member of Congress, when I learned that the El Paso VA had the worst wait times for mental health care in the country, meaning that care delayed functionally became care denied and was related to the suicide epidemic, we made it our priority and we turned around the VA in El Paso. We took that lesson nationally. And I worked with Republican and Democratic colleagues to expand mental health care to veterans, and we got it signed into law by the one person with whom I agree on almost nothing, Donald Trump, to show that at the end of the day, we will put the American people first, before party, before any other concern.
Thank you, Congressman O'Rourke. We've been asking voters to weigh in on what they'd most like to hear Democrats debate. Among the topics they told us they're most interested in, the climate crisis. Congressman Delaney, I'll start with you. You say the Green New Deal is about as realistic as Trump saying Mexico is going to pay for the wall. But scientists say we need essentially to eliminate fossil fuel pollution by 2050 to avoid the most catastrophic consequences. Why isn't this sweeping plan to fight the climate crisis realistic?
Well, first of all, because it ties its progress to other things that are completely unrelated to climate, like universal health care, guaranteed government jobs, and universal basic income. So that only makes it harder to do. My plan, which gets us to net zero by 2050, which we absolutely have to do for our kids and our grandkids, will get us there. I put a price on carbon, take all the money, give it back to the American people in a dividend. That was introduced by me on a bipartisan basis. It's the only significant bipartisan climate bill in the Congress. I'm going to increase the Department of Energy research budget by 5-fold because we fundamentally have to innovate our way out of this problem. I'm going to create a market for something called direct air capture, which are machines that actually take carbon out of the atmosphere. Because I don't think we'll get to net zero by 2050 unless we have those things. I'm going to increase investment in renewables, and I'm going to create something called the Climate Corps. That is a plan that's realistic. It's a bet on the U.S. private innovation economy and creates the incentives to get us to net zero by 2050 for our kids.
Thank you, Congressman. Senator Warren, you're a co-sponsor of the Green New Deal. Your response to Congressman Delaney.
So climate crisis is the existential crisis for our world. It puts every living thing on this planet at risk. I have a plan for a green industrial policy that takes advantage of the fact that we do what we do best, and that is innovate and create. So I've proposed putting $2 trillion in, so we do the research. We then say anyone in the world can use it, so long as you build it right here in America. That will produce about 1.2 million manufacturing jobs right here in Michigan, right here in Ohio, right here in the industrial Midwest. And the second thing we will do is we will then sell those products all around the world. Right now, for every $1 the United States spends trying to market around the world, China's spending $100.
Thank you, Senator Warren. Governor Hickenlooper, you take issue with the Green New Deal. Please respond.
Well, I think the guarantee for a public job for everyone who wants one is a classic part of the problem. It's a distraction. I share the urgency of everyone up here. We have to recognize, everyone's got good ideas. What we do in this country is no better than just a best practice, right? What we do here is a best practice and a template, but it's got to be done all over the world. So we've got to be building bridges right now with people like China who were cheating on international agreements and stealing intellectual property. We need to work on that, but not with the tariff system. We need every country working together if we're going to really deal with climate change in a realistic way.
Thank you. Senator Warren, your response.
Look, I put a real policy on the table to create 1.2 million new jobs in green manufacturing. There's going to be a $23 trillion worldwide market for this. This could revitalize huge cities across this country, and no one wants to talk about it. What you want to do instead is find the Republican talking point of a made-up piece of some other part and say, oh, we don't really have to do anything. That's the problem we've got in Washington right now. It continues to be a Washington that works great for oil companies, just not for people worried
Thank
about
you,
climate
Senator Warren.
change.
Congressman Ryan,
Yep.
we are here in Michigan, where there are about 180,000 workers in auto manufacturing. Your state of Ohio has around 96,000 workers in that industry. Senator Sanders is co-sponsoring a bill that would eliminate new gas-powered car sales by 2040. Given the number of auto manufacturing workers in your state, how concerned are you about Senator Sanders' plan?
Well, if we get our act together, we won't have to worry about it. My plan is to create a chief manufacturing officer so we could actually start making things in the United States again that would pull the government, the Department of Energy, Department of Transportation, work with the private sector, work with investors, emerging tech companies to dominate the electric vehicle market. China dominates it now, 50 to 60%. I want us to dominate the battery market, make those here in the United States and cut the workers in on the deal. The charging stations, solar panels, same thing. China dominates 60% of the solar panel market. So this person will work in the White House, report directly to me, and we're going to start making things again. But you cannot get there on climate unless we talk about agriculture. We need to convert our industrial agriculture system over to a sustainable and regenerative agriculture system that actually sequesters carbon into the soil. And you can go ask Gabe Brown and Alan Williams, who actually make money off of regenerative agriculture. So we can move away from all the subsidies that we're giving the farmers. They haven't made a profit in 5 years, and we could start getting good food into our schools and into our communities. That's going to drive healthcare down. That's another part of the healthcare conversation that we didn't even have. How do we start talking about health instead of just disease care?
Thank you. Senator Sanders, your response?
I get a little bit tired of Democrats afraid of big ideas. Republicans are not afraid of big ideas. They could give $1 trillion in tax breaks to billionaires and profitable corporations. They could bail out the crooks on Wall Street. So please don't tell me that we cannot take on the fossil fuel industry and nothing happens unless we do that. Here is the bottom line. We've got to ask ourselves a simple question. What do you do with an industry that knowingly, for billions of dollars in short-term profits, is destroying this planet? I say that is criminal activity that cannot be allowed to continue.
Thank you, Senator Sanders. Congressman, your response.
Well, yeah, I would just say, I didn't say we couldn't get there till 2040, Bernie. You don't have to yell. I mean, all I'm saying is we have to invent our way out of this thing. And if we're waiting for 2040 for a ban to come in on gasoline vehicles, we're screwed. So we better get busy now. And that's why I'm saying, get a chief manufacturing officer, align the environmental incentives with the financial incentives, and make sure that people can actually make money off of the new technologies that are moving forward. And then here's what I'll do as president, cut the worker in on the deal. Make sure these are union jobs, and I will double union membership to make sure that these new jobs pay what the old fossil fuel jobs pay.
Senator Sanders, your response.
Look, on this issue, my friends, there is no choice. We have got to be super aggressive if we love our children and if we want to leave them a planet that is healthy and is habitable. So I don't disagree with Tim. What that means is we got to A, take on the fossil fuel industry. B, it means we have to transform our energy system away from fossil fuel to energy efficiency and sustainable energy, and a hell of a lot of good union jobs as we do that. We got to transform our transportation system, and we have to lead the world.
Thank you, Senator
Sanders. This is not just an American issue.
Governor Bullock, your response.
You know, all of us agree that we have to address climate change. No one on the stage is talking about, though, the Republicans won't even acknowledge that climate change is real, Dana. And that's because of the corrupting influence of money. That has been the fight of my career. And second of which, as we transition to this clean energy economy, you got to recognize there are folks that have spent their whole life powering our country. And far too often, Democrats sound like they're part of the problem. We got to make sure to aid in those transitions as we get to a carbon neutral world, which I think we can do by 2040.
Thank you, Governor. Just to clarify, who is part of the problem?
I think Democrats often when they're saying, oh, these fossil fuel industries, these workers, those coal miner workers, look, the world's changing, we got to make it change. But I think Democrats often sound like the people that, as Congressman Ryan would say, shower at the end of the day, that they're part of the problem. And far too many communities are being left behind as we make this transition.
Thank you.
Look, we're having this discussion, and we can talk about competing
Thank
plans.
you, Governor. I want to give Senator Sanders a chance to respond.
Look, Steve, there ain't nobody in the Congress who's more strongly pro-worker than I am. So when I talk about taking on the fossil fuel industry, what I am also talking about is a just transition. All right? We can create, and what the Green New Deal is about, it's a bold idea. We can create millions of good-paying jobs. We can rebuild communities in rural America that have been devastated. So we are not anti-worker. No. We are going to provide, make sure that those workers have a transition, new jobs, healthcare, and education.
And look,
Governor Bullock, your response?
And look, Bernie, I was a union-side labor lawyer. I fought day after day. And I know, but we set this up as a false choice far too often. Are we going to actually address climate change? Fire seasons are 80 days longer in the West now. Or are we going to give people a better shot at a better life? You can do both, yes. But let's actually have the scientists drive this. Let's not just talk about plans that are written for press releases, but we'll go nowhere else if we can't even get a Republican to acknowledge that the climate's changing.
Congressman O'Rourke.
I've listened to scientists on this, and they're very clear. We don't have more than 10 years to get this right. And we won't meet that challenge with half steps or half measures or only half the country. We've got to bring everyone in. The people of Detroit and those that I listened to in Flint last week, they want the challenge. They want those jobs. They want to create the future for this country and the world. Those community college students that I met in Tucumcari, New Mexico, understand that wind and solar jobs are the fastest growing jobs in the country. And those farmers in Iowa say, pay me for the environmental services of planting cover crops and keeping more land in conservation easements. That's how we meet the challenge. We do it with everyone in this country. We bring everyone into the solution.
Thank you, Congressman. Mayor Buttigieg, your response.
We have all put out highly similar visions on climate. It is all theoretical. We will deal with climate if and only if we win the presidency, if and only if we beat Donald Trump. Nominate me, and you get to see the President of the United States stand next to an American war veteran and explain why he chose to pretend to be disabled when it was his chance to serve. Nominate me and we will have a different conversation with American voters about why the President of the United States thinks you're a sucker, when the problem in your life is your paycheck is not going up nearly as fast as the cost of housing or the cost of education or the cost of prescription drugs, and he has done nothing about it except tax cuts for the corporations.
Senator Klobuchar, I want to ask you about something that CNN heard from a Michigan Democratic primary voter. We've been reaching out and getting their questions. Kimber from Birmingham, Michigan, has this question. What is your plan to address infrastructure, including the water issue, so another Flint, Michigan does not happen again?
Thank you, Dana. And I was just in Flint. And they are still drinking bottled water in that town, and that is outrageous. So my plan, and I am the first one that came out with an infrastructure plan, and I did that because this is a bread and butter issue. It's a bread and butter issue for people that are caught in traffic jams. I think the governor here in Michigan smartly ran on the slogan, fix the damn roads. And it is an issue for union jobs. And so I think what we need to do is not have a president that's promised he was going to do that on election night, if anyone remembers, and then he hasn't followed through. He has done nothing. He blew up a meeting at the White House. I would put $1 trillion into this, and I would pay for it by, first of all, changing the capital gains rate, by doing something when it comes to that regressive tax bill that left everyone behind, but really made his Mar-a-Lago friends richer, as he promised. And I would take that money and put it into rural broadband and green infrastructure, so you won't have what you just saw in Detroit with the Jefferson Chalmers neighborhood, the African neighborhood that was African-American neighborhood that was most hit when you had those recent rainstorms. And I truly believe that if we're going to move on infrastructure and climate change, you need a voice from the heartland.
Thank you, Senator Klobuchar. Ms. Williamson, what's your response on the Flint water crisis?
My response on the Flint water crisis is that Flint is just the tip of the iceberg. I was recently in Denmark, South Carolina, where there is a lot of talk about it being the next Flint. We have an administration that has gutted the Clean Water Act. We have communities, particularly communities of color and disadvantaged communities all over this country, who are suffering from environmental injustice. I assure you, I lived in Grosse Pointe. What happened in Flint would not have happened in Grosse Pointe. This is part of the dark underbelly of American society. The racism, the bigotry, and the entire conversation that we're having here tonight, if you think any of this wonkiness is going to deal with this dark psychic force of the collectivized hatred that this president is bringing up in this country, then I'm afraid that the Democrats are going to see some very dark days. We need to say it like it is. It's bigger than Flint. It's all over this country. It's particularly people of color. It's particularly people who do not have the money to fight back. And if the Democrats don't start saying it, then why would those people feel that they're there for us? And if those people don't feel it, they won't vote for us, and Donald Trump will win.
Thank you very much, Ms. Williamson.
Thank you.
We want to turn now to the issue of race in America. Congressman O'Rourke, President Trump is pursuing a re-election strategy based in part on racial division. How do you convince primary voters that you'd be the best nominee to take on President Trump and heal the racial divide in America?
We'll call his racism out for what it is and also talk about its consequences. It doesn't just offend our sensibilities to hear him say, send her back, about a member of Congress because she's a woman of color, because she's a Muslim American. It doesn't just offend our sensibilities when he calls Mexican immigrants rapists and criminals, or seeks to ban all Muslims from the shores of a country that is comprised of people from the world over, from every tradition of faith. It is also changing this country. Hate crimes are on the rise, every single one of the last 3 years. On the day that he signed his executive order attempting to ban Muslim travel, the mosque in Victoria, Texas, was burned to the ground. So we must not only stand up against Donald Trump and defeat him in this next election, but we must also ensure that we don't just tolerate or respect our differences, but we embrace them. That's what we've learned in El Paso, Texas, my hometown, one of the safest cities in the United States of America, not despite, but because it's a city of immigrants and asylum seekers and refugees. We will show that our diversity is our strength in my administration.
Congressman O'Rourke, thank you very much. Governor Hickenlooper, why are you the best nominee to heal the racial divide in America? Please respond.
Well, the core value behind this entire country's history is working towards a more perfect union, that all people are created equal, and we've fallen far away from that. I think the job is incumbent on any one of us to make the convincing case that we can deliver an urban agenda that represents progress in schools. In Colorado, when I was mayor, we got to universal pre-K for every kid in the urban city. We did major police reform 10 years before Ferguson. Why is it now that 5 years after Ferguson we still don't have anything? How do we get affordable housing? We created a scholarship fund for every kid. You got to deliver a vision like that for the whole country.
Thank you, Governor. Senator Warren, I'm coming to you now. Last week, the FBI Director Christopher Wray said that the majority of domestic terrorism cases this year have been motivated by white supremacy. In fact, the alleged shooter in this weekend's attack in Gilroy, California, referenced a well-known white supremacist book on social media. How are you going to combat the rise of white supremacy?
We need to call out white supremacy for what it is, domestic terrorism, and it poses a threat to the United States of America. We live in a country now where the president is advancing environmental racism, economic racism, criminal justice racism, healthcare racism. The way we do better is to fight back and show something better. So I have a plan, for example, on education that says we have to build a better education system for all our kids, but we've got to acknowledge what's happened on race. So my plan has universal tuition-free college for all of our kids, but also increases the Pell Grants and levels the playing field by putting $50 billion into historically black colleges and universities. It cancels student loan debt for 95% of the kids with student loan debt and helps close the black-white wealth gap in America.
Thank you, Senator, very much. Mayor Buttigieg, you have been criticized for your handling of racial issues in your home city of South Bend, from diversity in the police force to housing policy. Given your record, how can you convince African Americans that you should be the Democratic nominee?
As an urban mayor serving a diverse community, The racial divide lives within me. I'm not saying that I became mayor and racism or crime or poverty ended on my watch. But in our city, we have come together repeatedly to tackle challenges like the fact that far too many people were not getting the help they needed in their housing, and so we directed it to a historically underinvested African-American neighborhood. Right now, in the wake of a police-involved shooting, our community is moving from hurting to healing by making sure that the community can participate in things like revising the use of force policy and making sure there are community voices on the Board of Safety that handles police matters. I've proposed a Douglas plan to tackle this issue nationally because mayors have hit the limits of what you can do unless there is national action. Systemic racism has touched every part of American life, from housing to health to home ownership. If you walk into an emergency room and you are black, your reports of pain will be taken less seriously. If you apply for a job and you are black, you are less likely to be called just because of the name on the resume. It's why I've proposed that we do everything from investing in historically redlined neighborhoods to build black wealth in home ownership.
Thank you, Mayor.
To supporting entrepreneurship for black
Thank
Americans.
you very much. Senator Klobuchar, what do you say to those Trump voters who prioritize the economy over the president's bigotry?
Well, first of all, there are people that voted for Donald Trump before that aren't racist. They just wanted a better shake in the economy. And so I would appeal to them. But I don't think anyone can justify what this president is doing. Little kids literally woke up this weekend, turned on the TV, and saw their president calling their city, the town of Baltimore, nothing more than a home for rats. And I can tell you, as your president, that will stop. The second thing I would say is that economic opportunity means economic opportunity for everyone in this country. I know that because I have lived it. And that means when we put out there better child care and better education, and we pay teachers more, and we make sure there's a decent retirement system in place, yes, we help the African American community, and we must, because they have been the ones that have been most hurt by what we've seen in the last decades. But we help everyone. So what I say to the people in my rural parts of my state, just like I say to them in the city and bring them together, is that economic opportunity must be there for everyone.
Senator Klobuchar, thank you very much. Congressman O'Rourke, please respond.
I want to acknowledge something that we're all touching on, which is the very foundation of this country. The wealth that we have built, the way we became the greatest country on the face of the planet, was literally on the backs of those who were kidnapped and brought here by force. The legacy of slavery and segregation and Jim Crow and suppression is alive and well in every aspect of the economy and in the country today. As president, I will sign into law a new Voting Rights Act. I will focus on education, address healthcare disparities, but I will also sign into law Sheila Jackson Lee's reparations bill so that we can have the national conversation we have waited too long in this country to have.
Thank you, Congressman O'Rourke. Speaking of reparations, Ms. Williamson, many of your opponents support a commission to study the issue of reparations for slavery. But you are calling for up to $500 billion in financial assistance. What makes you qualified to determine how much is owed in reparations?
Well, first of all, it's not $500 billion in financial assistance. It's $500 billion, $200 to $500 billion, payment of a debt that is owed. That is what reparations is. We need some deep truth-telling when it comes. We don't need another commission to look at evidence. I appreciate what Congressman O'Rourke has said. It is time for us to simply realize that this country will not heal. All that a country is a collection of people. People heal when there's some deep truth-telling. We need to recognize that when it comes to the economic gap between blacks and whites in America, it does come from a great injustice that has never been dealt with. That great injustice has had to do with the fact that there was 250 years of slavery, followed by another 100 years of domestic terrorism. What makes me qualified to say $200 to $500 billion? I'll tell you what makes me qualified. If you did the math of the 40 acres and a mule, given that there was 4 to 5 million slaves at the end of the Civil War, there were 4 to 5, and they were all promised 40 acres and a mule for every family of 4. If you did the math today, it would be trillions of dollars. And I believe that anything less than $100 billion is an insult, and I believe that $200 to $500 billion is politically feasible today because so many Americans realize there is an injustice that continues to form a toxicity underneath the surface, an emotional turbulence that only reparations.
Thank you very much. Senator Sanders,